Okay, here we have a rather long podcast on the subject of stress, allostasis, and allostatic load. And if you're not familiar with some of those words, just hang on, we're going to define them. You're probably familiar with the word homeostasis. Here's the dictionary definition: the tendency toward a relatively stable equilibrium between interdependent elements, especially as maintained by physiological processes. So we talk about homeostasis maintaining, for example, body temperature. It's pretty crucial that body temperature be maintained within a degree or two either side, and that challenges to body temperature be taken into account immediately, otherwise damage to the organism can result. So homeostasis is a very important thing, and we all are familiar with that concept. Here's a word that you may not be as familiar with. That's allostasis. Allostasis describes not a state but a process by which the body responds to stressors in order to regain homeostasis. So if you think of homeostasis as a condition, you could think of allostasis as a process that's constantly trying to restore the body to the condition of homeostasis. A nice little illustration of this is take off your shoes, stand on one foot, and try to maintain your balance. And pay attention to what's going on in your foot. You'll discover that your toes and your ankles and the ball of your foot and the arch and the heel and all those little muscles down there are constantly working in order to maintain homeostasis. And the process of all those little muscles and tendons moving all the time, that's allostasis. It's a process. Now, stress and allostasis are very intimately related. Every challenge to the organism constitutes a stressor. So it doesn't really matter whether the challenge is the temperature goes down a few degrees or the temperature goes up a few degrees, or somebody exposes you to a very threatening sight, a rattlesnake on your desk, for example. That would be a challenge, and the result is that that challenge stresses you. Every stressor produces stress. Now, stress, we know, is sometimes helpful. That's eustress. It prepares us to respond. A lot of students tell me that they work best under stress. I'm willing to believe that if they say so. That would be eustress, the kind of stress that helps them to get up the energy, to concentrate, to pay attention, to learn, to write, to do whatever's necessary. But there's a lot of stress that is not helpful. It is distress. And usually when we talk about stress, we're talking about distress. Every stressor produces a certain amount of stress. Some of it is helpful, some of it is not. Some of it is eustress, some of it is distress. Every stress also triggers the process of allostasis, as the body attempts to return itself to homeostasis. The stress, in a sense, pushes the body off balance. It would be, again, like you standing on one foot, and I come along and I push you on the shoulder or the back. I push you this way, I push you that way, and your poor foot has to do all kinds of things in order to maintain your homeostasis. Allostatic load is a term that refers to the sum total of all the adjustments that the organism must make in order to do allostasis in the face of all the many stressors that the organism experiences over time. So you can imagine if you experience a whole lot of stressors, then your allostatic load is going to build up, and you're going to have a high allostatic load as compared to a time, or maybe a different person, who experiences relatively few stresses in his or her life. And as a result, that person has a fairly low allostatic load. So you can kind of look around and you can say, oh, there's a guy with a really high allostatic load, or there's a guy with a really low allostatic load, and you can think about your own allostatic load and how it varies over time. Now here's another concept that we're going to lay alongside these, and that's the concept of resiliency. Resiliency is the ability of a person or an animal to withstand or to recover quickly from a difficult situation. So if something pushes you off balance, resiliency measures how quickly you can recover, how springy you are, in a sense. And resiliency is a quality that all people possess to some degree or another. We have the ability to adapt to changing temperatures. We have the ability to adapt to changing composition of the air. We have the ability to adapt to changes in our diets and maybe too many or too few calories. We have the ability to adapt to psychological traumas or challenges as well. So here's a way to relate all these concepts and to get a view of how we might talk about health. Suppose we were to say that health is equal to resiliency divided by allostatic load. I'll let you think about that for a minute. Health, good health, is related to or equal to our resiliency divided by our allostatic load. So that health is directly proportional to our resiliency and inversely proportional to our allostatic load. Consequences of this kind of a view would be that when resiliency is greater than allostatic load, we are able to cope and we're generally speaking in good health. But if resiliency becomes less than allostatic load, then we probably get sick. Now you can think of this physiologically. Assault after assault after assault on a body. Let's say a person who has a major surgery. A day or two later they have a complication. They have to go back for another surgery. Then they have another surgery. Then they have an allergy to a medication. Then somebody forgets to give them the right medication. And insult after insult adds up, increases their allostatic load as their body has to constantly adapt to these physiological challenges until finally their allostatic load overwhelms their resiliency and they die as a result perhaps of medical errors or simply as a result of too little resiliency. Another way, of course, another implication is that when resiliency is less than allostatic load, we get sick. And this can happen far more subtly. For example, we can just gradually, over a period of weeks or months or even years, just get worn down in our resiliency quotient and become the victim of a high allostatic load, not just physiologically, but psychologically, perhaps even socially or spiritually, because, as we've already learned, human beings are biopsychosocial spiritual beings, and systems thinking tells us that all of these pieces are related, and what impacts one piece impacts all pieces. The implications of this, again, when allostatic load overwhelms resiliency, we get sick. Now, if we can decrease allostatic load, or if we can increase resiliency, then we can promote healing and health. Now, you might think of your role in healthcare in these terms. Your job as a nurse, or as a PA, or as a physician, or whatever you are called to do, for that matter, as a friend or a family member, your job is to decrease a person's allostatic load, or possibly, and at the same time, increase their resiliency. And if you can do that, then you can be an agent of healing and health in that person's life. You could also, of course, apply this to your own life. You and I need to decrease our allostatic loads, and we need to increase our resiliency so that we can stay healthy. It is this correlation between these different factors that has given branch to a whole new realm of medical research studies called psychoneuroimmunology, which is defined as the effect of the mind on health and resistance to disease. And what it's looking at is how our psyche, that is to say how we think, how we feel, how we relate to other people, influences our neuro, that is to say our brain and our nervous system, which then in turn influences our immunology, that is to say our immune system, and how we respond to challenge in the realm of our immune system, either to resist the challenge and to stay well, or to be overwhelmed by the challenge and to get sick. Now remember, these are things I think you already know. Dr. Walter Cannon and his research on the fight or flight response. You see something, it prepares you immediately. Physiologically, it prepares you to either run away or to fight back. And remember the work of Dr. Hans Selye, described in Esther Sternberg's book in the area of stress, and how he theorized the general adaptation syndrome, which is true of all organisms, how they respond to stressors by adapting to the stressors in a physiological response. Or, if the stress is unrelieved and the adaptation doesn't relieve the stress, then how they experience pathology, ill effects from the unrelieved stressors. Remember also the physiology of stress, how the stimulus of the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis activates the pituitary, activates the adrenal glands. The end result is that you have a flood of stress hormones that flow out into the body, increasing heart rate, increasing blood pressure, increasing respiration in order to provide more blood to the lungs and the muscles, more oxygen to body tissues, how nostrils flare, digestion slows, hands and feet feel cool and moist, blood is shunted away from the skin and the internal organs so that it can be shunted to the brain and the skeletal muscles. The muscles tense, your blood clots faster, your pupils dilate, liver converts glycogen to glucose, which teams up with free fatty acids to supply more fuel for quick energy. That whole physiology of stress plays into either responding to a stressor with resiliency, or, if it's unrelieved, to the pathology of chronic stress. Now imagine the long-term effects of chronic, unrelieved, multi-year, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year of unrelieved stress. And you've just described the life of many, many people in our society who live every single day of their lives with chronic stress, fighting the traffic, fighting a spouse that isn't very cooperative, fighting with children, fighting with a boss, fighting with coworkers, fighting with the traffic on the freeway and the traffic lights that never seem to synchronize, and the car that always needs work, and the bills that always are unpaid, and the checkbook that never balances, and angel that never works, and the professor that keeps on demanding more work and less time. And you get a picture of the average American, at least, and how this person is experiencing chronic stress. And think what the long-term effects of that kind of physiological stress arousal are in that organism. You might think of stress as it was designed by the Creator to be a good thing when it is acute. That is to say, you come face to face with a mountain lion, your stress goes way up, you run away, you climb a tree, whatever, you get back home, you close the door, you're panting, and your stress begins to resolve, and over a period of time it returns to a normal level. As opposed to the kind of stress that most of us experience, which starts with the alarm clock jangling us awake in the morning, and we go through our days worried, with too many responsibilities, too little time, no margin in our lives, demands that we can't possibly meet, too many things to remember, we can't possibly remember them all, too much stuff to take care of, we can't possibly take care of it all. And we experience a chronic stress that is unrelieved over time. I started it out at somewhere near 20 or 25% to show that it's left over from day to day. It never really goes away. It interferes with our sleep at night. We toss and turn. We have anxiety dreams. You know what I'm talking about. Acute versus chronic stress. Acute stress produces the general adaptation response, whereas chronic stress produces pathological changes. Acute stress saves our lives. Chronic stress, on the other hand, produces or exacerbates lifestyle diseases. Diseases like adult onset diabetes, like atherosclerosis, that produces heart attacks and strokes. Diseases that for the most part are not caused by infectious organisms, but which are caused by the way we live our lives. Acute stress is a good thing. It saves our lives. God built it into us so that when we come face to face with a mountain lion, we won't get eaten. But chronic stress kills us. It becomes a problem more severe than the mountain lion. Imagine the role that spirituality could play in reducing stress, decreasing allostatic load, increasing resiliency, enhancing health, and healing disease. See, this is why spirituality and healing in the arena of healthcare is so vitally important. We can transplant arteries to make up for clogged coronary arteries. We can replace damaged kidneys. We can put in insulin pumps to control diabetes. We can give TPA to bust clots. But all of that doesn't address the real cause of the disease. It doesn't do anything about allostatic load. It doesn't do anything about resiliency. But spirituality can do that. So, would you please refer to the two scientific papers I asked you to read this week, the one by McEwen, the other one by Lutgendorf. Also review the podcasts on stress and allostatic load and resiliency. And remember your reading from Sternberg's book, and then go to the discussion forum, share your thoughts, and try and pull all of this together at this point at the 4th week of the course. We're now about 1/4 of the way through the semester. So try and pull that together and share your ideas with your classmates.